in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I am the Partnerships and Community Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I'm very excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Ellen Petry Leanse. She is the Chief People Officer at Lucidworks. Ellen, thanks so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm Ellen Petry Leanse. My pronouns are we, our. I say that kind of jokingly because I really love the sense of full inclusion. However, more officially, my pronouns are she, her. And when I was younger, I had so many things I wanted to be when I grew up. I was very interested in biology, which is probably why I love the field of neuroscience so much. I definitely wanted to be an inventor. That's been a really fun journey. I feel like I've ticked off a few of those. And I wanted to make sure whatever I did involved the arts. So yeah, that's the creative life has always been what I've loved.
I love that. I imagine in your role today as Chief People Officer, there's a lot of room, especially over the past 2 years, for creativity, redesign, reimagining processes, and working with people across the organization in different phases of their life. But before we get into specific questions around strategy, I always like to ask the why question of how you think your personal journey has really led you to be a Chief People Officer and specifically be at Lucidworks.
Fantastic. Well, I have a non-traditional HR background. My background is in product design and strategy. As I looked over the decades of my career, I noticed a very wide difference, a very broad difference between the companies that really set themselves apart and that flourished, and those that simply couldn't seem to get their feet under them and move forward. And I always saw that difference being about the way people were treated. And I wanted to be part of a company that really lived values around people, full inclusion and belonging. And in fact, our number one value of our 6 at Lucidworks is honor people. I love that value so much. I wanted to be part of a company and a culture that lived the value of honoring people so that people could do their best work, bring their best contribution, and lead lives where their job enhanced their lives as much as they enhance the contribution at their jobs. So that's really how my personal journey led me here. And I feel like a collector who along the way had so many diverse and interesting experiences. And wow, a range, a wealth of diverse and unique teachers, lucky me, all of whom helped me see this vision of people leadership as the thing I most wanted to be involved in.
I love that. I feel like a major role in what you were talking about too is just fostering that kind of workplace or just that environment where people can do their best work. And I love the perspective of your workplace also providing you with like the resources and the tools to make sure that you're living the fullest life as well. And so many conversations are happening around company culture right now. And I want to ask from your opinion and experiences, what are qualitative and really quantitative ways you can measure that culture of inclusion and diverse experiences, recognizing that all employees are so different?
I got to tell you, Christina, I think we have a long way to go in measuring that, and having learned a little bit about AllVoices, I see why you asked this question, because truly, I don't think there's anything more important than companies understanding where their employees, where their team members are, and team members feeling empowered to safely, candidly, and in a timely manner share the things that are on their mind about making the company that they probably love better.
Yeah.
So qualitatively, I have a really wonderful friend. Her name is Oshoke Abalu, and she talks about smiles per square foot. I think that's great.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, it's a wonderful metric, isn't it? Just really how people show up ready to go. And, smiles do matter. There are 2 reasons why. First, the act of smiling actually changes our brain chemistry and activates more positivity, solutions orientation, and creativity. It's actually an actual neuroscience fact. However, the other thing is really looking at people's willingness to engage in ways that really connect them to people is always an indication of contribution and engagement. So in this remote world, it's a little bit harder to measure those smiles per square foot. And the other metrics, though, there are a couple of things that come to mind. Mind you, we have a long way to go in this, but I always find OKRs, or OKR, I guess you're supposed to say, as a wonderful metric for measuring engagement, because really understanding how committed people are to doing what they said they did, and achievement of OKR is a very important metric to me. I have strong opinions about OKR, like nobody will be surprised at that. I don't believe in making them all like, crush it, stretch goals. I believe that they should be about 80-20, ambitious yet realistic. I also believe they should be at least 60% collaborative and shared, because people do their best work when they partner and bring people together. So I like measuring delivery to OKR outlooks. I also look at things like participation, even screens on participation in things like all hands meetings. How much do people want to show up and engage even in virtual settings? I also look, and I guess this applies to, I'm not saying that we have an answer to how we do this, and we could mean the company that I'm with, Lucidworks, but many of the companies I've worked with, and that is, how generous and helpful are people willing to be? How much proactive, helpful contribution, input, and dialogue is offered? That is both an indicator of psychological safety and a commitment to sort of a shared success or shared outcome by making the collective better.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's really interesting in terms of looking at both qualitative and quantitative ways. Smiles per square foot, I think it's really interesting as well, and how people are willing to really show up for others, how people get onboarded and help each other out. I love that. Raise your hand.
Yeah, I want to plus one you on that. So often, and I've seen this trend over my career, back in the day, we didn't have as many ways of collecting or soliciting quantitative information. And there was always a lot of tire kicking and doubt around, different things in qualitative. Understandably, there can be bias, there can be the wrong questions and so forth. That can be true with quantitative data as well. However, I believe leadership is best served by looking at both. Both modalities of input are highly valuable. And at the core of both of them has to be genuine curiosity and openness to what the information, as well as the data, I know it's all data, even if it's qualitative, but to what the information shows.
I think that's an interesting point as well, talking specifically around leaders at an organization and modeling that behavior of being genuine and being curious. And our workplaces are really microcosms of our community and our society at large. And from a company perspective, I want to start out with, people are at different parts of the organization, but leaders are pretty visible even in a remote setting. What
Right.
what are your thoughts around, creating that authentic connection and growth from a leadership perspective? What is their kind of responsibility there, and how do you like tangibly show up?
To me, the most important success metric any leader can have is how much leadership do they activate? How much leadership do they elevate and empower for others? So for me, as a leader, I would consider it a success metric to watch someone take the type of ownership that allowed me to step back and focus on something else. So I think leaders remembering that leadership is a service role, and the service role is about empowering others to develop their own leadership influence and strength, and to model that in, this is why I believe so much in values aligned ways. I think the most important way that leaders can show up is as peers, believe it or not, but peers, or I should say, and peers who are ready, willing, and able to empower others, to take the leadership role when it is warranted, when it serves the greater good, and to always remember that they're coming to this as levers with a service mentality in mind, and with a named and known commitment to serve others and help them grow to get more of what they want out of the workplace they're in.
I like that service mentality and mindset as well, especially in leaders and executives and people managers as well. And there's a ton of research out there that says, when you are working for a company you believe in, you work with team members who are actively listening to you, a supportive manager, you are happier in the work that you do. But of course, nobody is happy all of the time. But I want to ask, do you think it's a responsibility of a company to ensure that employees are happy? Why or why not?
I think it's more than a responsibility. I think it's an essential, it's a manifesto. And the reason is that, we humans are both intellectual and emotional beings, spiritual, all kinds of other things too. But let's only look at the intellect. It's so funny, Christine, I'm looking at notes that I've taken of things that I'm going to be writing about soon. And I've even written this little post-it right here. It says the drama tax, right? And we as companies have to remember that we pay a tax when our employees are not happy, or when our employees are psychologically unsafe, or when they're psychologically burdened. And actually, when I was teaching, I taught at Stanford a number of years ago, and in one of the research projects that I did was called What We Fake and What We Hide. And it was done with executives, primarily at Silicon Valley, but then later at global companies. We looked at what these executives had to fake or hide in order to be perceived as successful in their work. And when I analyzed the research, we had a really interesting methodology for eliciting this from the community, and for discussing and learning from it. When I analyzed, I thought, my gosh, I have in this set of data, I have executives from 40 or more publicly traded companies. And these people are literally having to bring an artificial self to work. And in order to be perceived as effective in their job, they're having to fake either a personal attribute or characteristic, or a leadership style. They're having to play a role that does not feel authentic to who they really are. Or they're having to deny a truth they feel, even sometimes a concerning truth they feel about their business, in order to protect their job security. When I researched how this paid off at, pardon me for saying, but at Volkswagen, with a $38 billion fee and an ongoing burden that they have for addressing what could have been surfaced through the Dieselgate scandal, and certainly many other companies, headlines that we've all read as well. The thing is when we're paying that sort of cognitive tax, the brain does not have capacity to actually originate the type of innovative, creative, original, and sort of breakthrough thought that allows us to create a visionary future that ultimately creates more value for our either privately held community, private holders, or our public shareholders. And so promoting healthy discourse and being able to know the truth, take the pulse in a diagnostic and corrective way about what is really happening at the company, is actually, to me, it's an economic manifesto. It's something that really has to be considered as we build value as companies.
I like the kind of economic manifesto perspective, because not only is it really important for people to feel like they could do their best work, but it also impacts the bottom line. It impacts stakeholders. It
Absolutely.
impacts on a whole.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
If
absolutely.
we have people who are only coming in at 65, 70, 80%, I can't measure it, based on my research, or people coming in at below 50%, let me tell you. If we have those coming in, think of the dilution of value across a company and how much more is possible. So yes, I think this is one of the great opportunities facing business now, is how can we really unleash more potential from our people by allowing them to really feel safe to step into all of the light they're capable of holding at work.
Absolutely. Psychological safety is an critical part or building block foundation to really prosper and have that innovation, really have that healthy discourse that you were talking about as well. And a lot of folks go from being an individual on a team to saying, okay, I want to be a people manager. I want to help be a culture conduit and, empower people and motivate folks to do their best work. Sometimes, the best individual contributors do not make the best managers. In your opinion, how do you really think about training effective people managers so they're set up for success, they're properly resourced, and think about, skills like empathy and equity-driven leadership?
Oh boy, that's a whole other conversation, isn't it? One thing I really love doing at Lucidworks, and really loved creating at Lucidworks, was a really unusual leadership and management training track. Like many high growth startups, we had a number of managers. First, we have a relatively thin manager layer, just structurally. It's sort of how we grew. It's gotten more robust, yet that has also been a process. But like many high growth companies, especially in tech, we sort of grew organically. And, you're 100% right. It was the people who were really good at their jobs who ended up having manager responsibility. And until we started orchestrating what management really meant and really taking both a service and a very human centric by design approach to management, only by doing that have we sort of created the culture where many of our managers are actually loving being managers, which is pretty great. And where people genuinely feel a lot of unity with their managers. And thank goodness have ways of talking about it if they don't. Now, this is going to sound really counterintuitive, but the last year and the hit of COVID really helped us with this, because all of a sudden we realized like there were a lot of things that had been easy in the past that we could have taken for granted. Like we all got to show up in the office and break bread together, have a really nice lunch or do a team offsite or something. Well, all of a sudden here we are virtualized going, oh my gosh, I really have to connect with this person over Zoom. And, I don't even like talking to a screen or something like that. Leveled the playing field in a lot of ways and brought us all down to a level where we could step by step build up. So our manager training focused on empathy, like really, really, leading with empathy. A lot of managers found themselves having to deal with scenarios they never thought they'd have to navigate before. I'm thinking of one manager who lived with their spouse in a little apartment, and the spouse was at home with their little child. And that manager went to work every day and came home and just got to enjoy family life and all of that. All of a sudden, that manager was in the same room with a little one and a spouse who were also sharing this. Okay, well, empathy begins at home. They had to realize if this is hard for me, how can I extrapolate that thinking out to other folks on my team? So it was a humbling exercise for so many of us. And to be honest, I really like the outcome of it because I've seen so many managers of all kinds of backgrounds and levels of experience and demographics and everything really get better at being just good human beings over the last year and a half.
Mm-hmm. I love that because empathy, the statement that you said, empathy does begin at home. These are not practices, especially for managers, that you can silo out as well, leading with vulnerability and empathy, and really having this conversation. Active listening is something we can apply in all aspects of our lives and something that we need to definitely practice. And I think one of the things, at least I can speak for myself currently, is being a little conflict averse and not being, able to have really hard conversations without practicing them as well. And that modeling behavior from leadership and managers is really important. But what is your kind of advice for folks to really promote healthy discourse? Because at the end of the day, we know that it does improve the product, it's helpful for people, and just giving that kind of feedback, constructive feedback, and sharing your ideas is important.
It is such an excellent question. The first thing that comes to mind is that growth is seldom comfortable. And we really live a growth mindset. And even if we look at the way the brain works, when we are uncomfortable, it's because the brain is not running the familiar routines that it thinks it has to keep running to keep you safe and alive. So it's in a different modality than it has been, than it generally is in. So I think getting people to understand when we feel uncomfortable, that is actually an invitation to growth. And there's a big difference between safety and comfort. I am all about a culture and a workplace environment that is 100% committed to psychological safety. And within the crucible of that safety, it's okay to get uncomfortable by being able to have healthy discourse. Now, one key that I have taught and certainly hope I practice and have found pretty successful is the beautiful word curious or curiosity. And when we say these two magic words, I'm curious, if we genuinely mean we're curious, we are much more likely to ask a psychologically safe question or propose a psychologically safe challenge than we would be if we simply blurted it out. So getting people to start with that, okay, am I curious? No, I'm angry. Okay, great. Get back to curious before you talk about this. I don't know I don't know, it's sort of it's an interesting structure, but Brene Brown uses it, and a couple of other really interesting leadership guides. And it's the structure of objective fact, story, and meaning. So there's objective fact, a thing that happened, a tree fell, right? No one can deny. We looked out, we had a big old storm here in California last night. Trust me, a few trees fell. I can look up the street and say a tree fell. Now I could make up a story that's like, oh, the tree was sick and that's why it fell. Or, it was a big storm and the tree fell. Okay, maybe, but maybe it fell the night before, who knows, right? And then the meaning is, oh my gosh, we're losing all our trees in this area. And between the objective fact, the story, and the meaning, we're in a drama escalation pattern. You see, because we're personalizing, we're taking the truth from what happened outside, we're personalizing it into our own map of stories, assumptions, biases, beliefs, opinions, outlooks, mindsets, attitudes, what have you. So being able to start with simply naming truth. The report was late. The fact that the report was late does not mean, oh, Ellen messed up again, or, oh, Ellen's a slacker, right? Ellen messed up again as a story. Ellen, a slacker, is the meaning that someone would make from it. I hope they'd never make of it. But that's how people work. So getting to objective truth and staying curious are two of my gateways to healthy discourse and conflict resolution.
I think that's a critical piece of the foundation as well, and asking an internal question before you externally blurt something out, or you're coming from a place of frustration, or you're angry, or you're upset about something else, really making sure that you have that key foundation in place. And I love that you brought up Brene Brown as well. I always think about her, vulnerability talks and the story I'm telling myself versus the story that you're telling yourself too, is you'll never know unless you have that effective communication together as well. You have the objectives. And I want to talk about listening and employee feedback. Some folks are definitely maybe a little afraid of employee feedback, but it seems to be really important in kind of the thriving workplaces that we are seeing here today, like Lucidworks. I want to ask how you see employee feedback management as an important tool to building that culture of listening, and how you see that manifesting in other kind of parts of the organization at Lucidworks.
Yeah, I think there's probably no company out there that I can think of that doesn't have an opportunity to get even better at listening. And the great news is, in these times of change, you open with, we are in a time of transformation. Two things are going to happen. One, employees are going to align and affiliate much more effectively with companies where they feel heard and where they feel that they're making a difference. And in a highly, highly competitive hiring market, being able to have employees be heard really matters. And then the other thing is looking at trend analysis over time. How do the things we're hearing change? And earlier in this conversation, Christina, we talked about, that when employees can really provide helpful information, that's quite a success metric. Like, what a thing it would be to get from the point of employees sharing mostly concern-related information to mostly collaborative related information. That's pretty exciting. And it's hard. It's really hard. So I think some of the blockers are, first, it's all virtual. There might have been a time where I could have been walking down the hallway and somebody could have said, hey, Ellen, you wouldn't happen to have 10 minutes, would you? Right? Mm-hmm. And you just sit down and, wow, I had no idea this was going on. I'm so glad to hear it. We don't have that anymore. We don't have it anymore. We're not together like we were. And you know what? Even if we were together, that's not fully inclusive. Some people are going to be based in a different country or even in a different region. There isn't that happenstance. And by the way, on that topic, I think that is a very important thing for companies to be careful of right now, is how do they become fully inclusive even in hybrid environments, where by definition the frequency bias, the affinity bias, whatever it might make people think like, oh, Ellen's really awesome, more than Terry over in some other office, simply because they see me more often, right? That's not necessarily an accurate measure of my real contribution. I need to find ways to level that playing field. And then listening comes again from genuine commitment to care. And again, for companies willing to have a growth mindset, even when it hurts, and to be able to look in the face of information, be it anecdotal, qualitative, quantitative, and genuinely be curious in how they learn from it.
Absolutely. I think it's important to, actively listen, have that critical question asking as well to ask people's feedback, but also show that you did listen, even if you can't change something right now, saying that you actually heard them is really important, building that trust. And
You are right.
get you right.
Yeah. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And to even for leadership to say, we have heard this and we don't have an answer for you now. However, we hear you and it is something we will be addressing.
Yeah, it's been brought to our attention, just like that acknowledgement as well that someone did come forward, whether, they came in one-on-one or, they submitted feedback. Feedback comes in all different ways. And what we're talking about too with COVID and remote hybrid work, these are all changes over the past 2 years. And in these conversations, we're always talking about innovation and how people have redesigned systems and processes to be more inclusive, but also just to innovate with the times.
Yeah.
Share an example of how you and your team have innovated over the past 2 years as well.
I really have to say that the COVID stuff does stand out. And although no one would have ever invited this time in, the invitation to think different has been pretty profound. And so an innovation that comes to mind for my team is being extremely human-centric in our approach and remembering that we don't have a single employee at our company. We do have 250 something human beings.
Yeah.
And these human beings are going to choose to play the role of employee if it balances out with the rest of their human life. Now, that is actually, if you really think about it, and some of the things you've brought up in this conversation already, Christina, is if an employee really feels that they are a human being empowered to have a good and balanced and, sort of a sustainable life, they are not going to be paying that cognitive tax of going like, oh my gosh, I better be up, better be online at 7:30 tonight, or they're going to think I'm slacking. Like that is not conducive to people doing great work. Not sustainably. We all have our peaks. There are times when, I look back at some weeks I've had even during COVID time where I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how many hours I put in that week. However, that was to get through a specific time. And then afterwards, making it sustainable with my life. And this should be true for everyone. Making it sustainable is job one. So I believe one of our great innovations was really leading with a culture of, we want to take care of you. One of the things that Lucidworks did really well at this time, and I credit our CEO with this, is we really saw the wear and tear on people and we worried about burnout. We all had that, right? And we were early in saying, take some time. And by the way, not just COVID, but like things that happened in the world beyond, some very challenging political scenarios and division, in the country that everybody felt like if one thing we were united in feeling ununited or whatever the word is and separated, right? We felt so different. The tragedies around George Floyd and some of the other really harsh things that happened to key communities in our country and our culture, there was a lot of burden to that. And giving people time to say, I'm stepping away, we're just going to breathe, was really, if you will, galvanizing and unifying for our company in ways that I think were very innovative.
I think that's really important. And I always say the greatest gift you can give people is time to just stop the burnout or be proactive about it, really think about what the priorities are as well. And sustainable, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. So really effectively communicating.
So true, so true. And remembering that these are human beings, and human beings, we do not do our best when we are overly, when we're heading toward burnout. Now, by the way, the irony is, it's a beautiful irony, is that it actually, the research shows people actually contribute better when they are not feeling like they have to contribute more, always on, that I've written a book that talks about, it talks about even how this always on, it's about many things, but a key point is how this always onness actually leads us to less happiness, more burnout, and thus lower contribution.
And I think it goes to your earlier point as well about the performative nature of folks and feeling like you need to be a certain way or hiding certain characteristics as well, because we're quote unquote always on and need to have this kind of persona or mentality as well.
Right. Can I say one other thing about that?
Go ahead.
There's some really interesting research out of Princeton. I think it's out of Princeton. Might be Harvard, I don't know. However, it's about the rise of busy as a status symbol in American business
Oh God, yeah.
and how busy came to be an indication of value. And you read it and you're like, what went wrong here? Like, oh, I'm so busy, right? When did it come to be about being busy as a metric of productivity or even less than that, success? I'll leave you with that question. I don't have an answer.
I don't have an answer either. I see a lot of articles and kind of research to your point as well around the hustle mentality, always on and, busy as a marker of success. But there's also something to be said by efficiency and making sure you're doing your best work at the peak times and all of these things. So,
yes. And also the fact that creative thought only happens when there is some spaciousness for cognitive integration. Yeah.
Absolutely. I know I asked some specific questions around your strategy and experience at Lucidworks and just what you're seeing in general in the industry, but is there a next problem or situation you're trying to solve that we haven't discussed, or what's taking up the most brain space in Ellen's mind right now?
Yeah, I guess, man, that's a whole other conversation. So 3 things come to mind. One is really engaging everyone in the benefits of inclusion. And the reason that I say this, true inclusion, true equality, workplace equality, it really allows everyone to unleash more potential. And when people understand, all people understand that DEI is not about them, it's not about them. I pointed away for the audience who can't see this. It's not about her or them or him or that. It's about us and it's about me. Full inclusion. How do I show up as more of myself by empowering others to do the same? Having seen companies that have made tremendous progress along the DEI continuum, my goodness, like watching what happens to teamwork, to efficiency, to better rollouts, to better adoption, because problems are solved before the unintended consequences of them through, biased thinking turn into problems that other people have to deal with, like customers and things like that. So that big, like, true inclusivity in DEI is great. Now we have some big steps to take before we get there in most places, but really when everyone sees the benefit, the enlightened self-interest of that, I think that's going to be great. The other thing is really thinking about work and what it means to work for people who have caregiving and caretaking responsibilities. And to some extent, most of us do have some caretaking and caregiving responsibilities. And how do companies allow space for that in ways that allow people to have sustainable lives, where they actually feel the sense of mutuality coming to work, where they show up like they're very grateful for their work because it allows them, their work empowers them to have more of the life that they want. There's a wonderful conference in Austria, and I didn't go to it this year, though I did a virtual talk, and it was really about the value of that mutuality when we can think different about really how people show up to work and to create more permeability and porousness in the way people and their jobs interrelate. So that's another theme. And then the third thing is, wow, it's kind of a big thought, but it really is looking at a new model for what business needs to be in this world. And we are watching, all of us, a transformation at this time where people say, oh my gosh, it's a candidates market right now. Candidates have the power. I think it's more than a candidates market. It is a people's market, and people and companies are very different things. And I have heard people say some things about what they think of companies that I've never heard before. Like I'm hearing people say things like, why would I give so much of my time and my life to an organization that doesn't even, what they do doesn't even matter to me? Like it's not even something I'm aligned with.
Right.
I believe every company is going to have to go back and think about how do we help create meaning in an authentic way to the people who honor us by joining us and by being participants in what we wish to build together. It's almost a reinvention of what it means to be a company or a team in a pretty significant way. I want to shout out Canva as an exemplar of that with their beautiful $40 billion valuation a couple of weeks back and the huge commitment their CEO made to giving back, to
Mhm.
being a company of good in perpetuity. It's like, oh, heck yeah. Like I would want to work for a company like that, right? So
Mhm.
every company, Canva's a very special case, they're much larger, but every company should be thinking along those lines. What can we do to be of real value and meaning to the people who honor us with their participation in our vision?
Yeah, that's a big question. And I think no matter what industry, a company is in, everybody has an opportunity to really bake that meaning into their business and really communicate to that with their employees as well. And along those same lines too, in terms of successful companies in the future, how to
Right.
finish the sentence of in order for people leaders, to cultivate a really healthy company culture and be successful in the future, they must have blank.
Mm, curiosity, I guess, my favorite word. They must have, also, they must have objectivity because it's so easy to say, there's so many words that could come up for that. However, it's important to remember objectivity. When we're objective and we're really looking simply at what's happening, we haven't inserted our own story or opinion or meaning on it. And we can pay attention at a different level to what is really going on. And then I would also say, if it's a word that's a little different than curiosity or objectivity, they also must have challengers. They must have people who tell them, no, you're missing this. Here's what you really need to see, because that helps us get out of our own bias and into a fuller horizon.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. Curiosity is very important. And I also like to ask folks as well, in a similar thread, when was your last learning moment?
Right here now. You ask great questions and you got me thinking, and that's, yeah. But let me see if I can be more specific. My last learning moment. Oh, I had one this morning. We were onboarding some new employees, and I always lead with the values. And an employee reminded me that they had interviewed with our company a couple of years ago, and I had actually interviewed them, and they had not been the one chosen for the role. And the learning moment I had is um, when an employee's name comes up and I see that they're joining the company and joining, I'm going to definitely search my archives and see if we've ever crossed paths before. Just really good to know. Because if I'd known that, I would have said, oh my gosh, I really enjoyed our conversation 2 years ago. It's so great that you persisted and you're finally with us. So
Oh,
I hope that question is hard to answer because there are so many. The minute we stop learning, like, why are we even there, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You always want to be learning. You want to see, there's always room for improvement as well. Is there anything that I didn't ask you in our interview that you want to share with folks who are listening, or maybe a key takeaway you just really want to bold, italicize, capitalize to make sure folks bring with them?
Love to. That's such a great question. Here's what I would say is to the listeners out there, those things you feel inside actually are a form of intelligence. They may not be out yet in the workplace, yet they're probably things that would be beneficial. Pay a lot of attention if something feels like a dissonance, and then decide what you want to do about that, because very likely that is an invitation to opportunity and improvement, whether that's the improvement of your or the improvement of your own professional journey. What you feel is real, right? And yeah, pay attention.
What you feel is real. Pay attention to that. I think that's a very validating point to leave on, and also a good kind of call to action to do that self reflection. Ellen, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
Absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a key pillar of success for the company as a whole. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.